Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. I don't remember when the first crack appeared in our marriage. It wasn't something obvious, nothing dramatic. It was like a subtle shift in the air, a small change in her mannerisms. But I didn't notice it until it was too late. Maybe it was a lack of passion, or perhaps it was something deeper that neither of us had the courage to face. But what I do remember, what I will never forget, was that one sentence. The sentence that shattered whatever we had left. I wasn't expecting anything to go wrong that evening. In fact, I had planned everything carefully. A dinner at our favorite spot, a new bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion, and a quiet walk afterward through the city streets. It was supposed to be just another Friday, like so many before it. But I should have known that something was off when she didn't seem excited. We had been married for 3 years, but in a way, I had been living in a fog for the past few months. We'd grown so accustomed to the routine: work, home, TV shows, dinner, no surprises, no sparks. But I kept telling myself that things would get better. I didn't want to believe that this was how things would end. I spent extra time getting ready. I made sure I looked good, wanted to show her that I still cared, that I wasn't going to give up. When I arrived in the living room, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Hey babe, ready to go?" I asked, trying to sound upbeat. I even tried to hide the nervous tension building in my chest. She glanced up at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of something. Maybe surprise, maybe guilt. I couldn't quite place it, but she didn't seem thrilled. "Yeah, just let me finish this text," she said, her voice sounding distracted, almost dismissive. I nodded, feeling a familiar unease settle over me. We had never been like this before. We used to talk for hours, share everything. Now it was like pulling teeth just to get a response. When we finally made it to the restaurant, she seemed distant. The entire evening felt strange, almost like we were strangers sitting across from each other. I tried to start a conversation, asking her how her week had been, but she gave me short, uninterested answers, her eyes occasionally drifting back to her phone. It was as if she was physically there, but mentally somewhere else. When the food came, I tried to focus on the meal, on the ambience, on anything that could distract me from the growing realization in my mind. But then she said it. The words that changed everything. "You know, Noah," she started, pushing her food around her plate, not meeting my eyes. "You're just not exciting anymore." The words hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't anger, though. It was a deep, gnawing confusion. I felt my stomach drop, my heart skip a beat. I knew something was wrong, but hearing it from her mouth felt like a punch to the gut. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process what she was saying. "What do you mean?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "I mean," she hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether she should continue. "I feel like we're stuck in this routine. You don't do anything spontaneous anymore. You don't try to make things interesting. It's like we're just coexisting. And I need more than that." I could feel my face flush. A wave of emotions rushed through me. Hurt, disbelief, anger, but I couldn't find the words to respond. Instead, I just nodded. "So, what do you want me to do? What exactly do you mean by exciting?" I asked, my voice trembling now. I wanted to sound calm, but my mind was racing. Was this about me? Was she saying she didn't love me anymore? She looked at me with this blank expression. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. It was like she had already checked out. "I don't know. I just want something more. I want to feel something. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's not even about you." It was at that moment that I realized something. She wasn't just talking about me. She was talking about her. This wasn't about our relationship, not really. It was about her boredom, her dissatisfaction. She wasn't even looking at what we had built together. She was looking for something else, something new, something more exciting. And the idea that she was blaming me for her own unhappiness, that she was blaming me for not being enough, it broke something inside me. I wanted to shout, to call her out on it, but instead, I found myself swallowing the words. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not noticing the signs when they first appeared. The signs that had been there all along, but I had refused to acknowledge. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I felt my hands start to shake, but I did my best to compose myself. "So, what do you want to do?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. I wasn't prepared for her response, though. "I think we need some space," she said, her tone casual, like she was talking about something as trivial as rearranging furniture. "I've been thinking about it for a while. and I think we need a break. Maybe it'll help. Maybe I'll be able to figure out what I really want." And in that moment, I knew everything had changed. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. I wasn't going to sit there and beg for something that she wasn't willing to fight for. Without a word, I stood up from the table. I didn't slam my chair back or storm off like some drama-filled movie scene. I just stood up, calmly grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. I left her sitting there, stunned, staring after me as I walked away. It wasn't a dramatic exit. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I just walked away, quietly. And I knew, as I stepped out into the cold night air, that I was leaving behind something that was already long gone. I wish I could tell you that I left that night with clarity, but I didn't. Walking away from her, from the table, from everything that once felt familiar, was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I stepped into the crisp night air, my mind was racing. I wasn't angry, not in the way I thought I'd be. I was numb. I kept replaying what she said. "You're not exciting anymore." It wasn't just a criticism, it was a verdict. It was her way of telling me that I had failed her. Failed us. I had no idea when things started to slip. Was it a gradual thing? Or had I been blind to her growing discontent? I don't know how long I walked. The streets were nearly empty at that hour, and my steps echoed in the silence. I wanted to be angry, but the anger never came. Instead, I was filled with this deep, gnawing emptiness. I wasn't upset at her, not really. I was upset with myself for not realizing sooner, for not seeing the signs. When I finally got home, I stood at the door for a long moment. The house felt cold and quiet. Mara wasn't there, of course. I hadn't expected her to be. She had a habit of retreating when things got difficult. But that night, I wasn't sure where she was. Maybe she was out with friends. Maybe she was home, waiting for me to come back, to explain myself, to apologize. The thought of explaining myself made my stomach churn. What was there to explain? She had already made her decision. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and sat down at the table. My mind was a whirlwind, every thought tumbling over the other. I couldn't stop thinking about the dinner. The way she had looked at me when she said it. The way she had been so calm. Almost as if she'd been waiting for this moment to happen. It made me question everything. Had she already checked out? Had she been planning this for weeks, months? And if she had, why hadn't I seen it coming? I tried calling her once. No answer. Then again and again. The calls went straight to voicemail. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but I needed to hear her voice. I needed to know where her head was. But she never picked up. I spent the next few hours trying to distract myself, but my thoughts kept circling back to her. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. This wasn't just about me being boring. There had to be more to it. Maybe she was seeing someone else. Maybe she had been for a while. The idea gnawed at me, eating away at any semblance of peace I had left. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and sent her a simple message. "We need to talk." It wasn't the most creative text. It wasn't the dramatic plea I wanted to send. But it was all I could manage. I wasn't asking for an explanation. I wasn't even sure I wanted one. But I needed something. Anything. To give me closure, to give me a sense of where we stood. I waited. The hours dragged on, and still, nothing. No response. That's when I started to realize the truth. Mara had already made up her mind. I was no longer part of the equation. I was the boring husband, the one who had become predictable, the one who had lost her interest. It hit me all at once, this overwhelming sense of finality. Our marriage, the life we had built together, was gone, and I hadn't even seen it coming. The silence after I sent the message felt suffocating. The kind of silence that's thick and heavy, like it's closing in around you. I knew she had seen it. She had to have. She was always glued to her phone, constantly checking it, even when we were supposed to be spending time together. Yet, she hadn't replied. It was almost as if she was letting me stew in the quiet, letting me sit with my own thoughts until I could figure out what to do next. I tried to tell myself that maybe she was just giving me space, that maybe she needed time to process what had happened. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. She was ignoring me. She was shutting me out, and I could feel it in every second that ticked by. I tried to distract myself, to force my mind onto anything else, but the thoughts kept creeping back in. The words she had said to me at the restaurant, "You're not exciting anymore." They echoed in my head, louder with every passing minute. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much weight her words carried. It wasn't just a casual comment. It wasn't a critique of my personality or something I could easily fix. No, it was a judgment of everything I had become. A judgment of us. And that was the part one couldn't shake off. I looked at the clock, the hours stretching out in front of me. It was already past midnight. I should have been asleep, but I couldn't. I needed answers. I couldn't just let this hang in the air, unresolved. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it was clear that it wasn't. But the truth is, I didn't know how to confront her. Not anymore. The longer I waited for her response, the more the reality of the situation set in. I wasn't just the boring husband she had outgrown. I was the guy who had been replaced. Not physically, at least not yet, but emotionally. She had already checked out, and I was still here, clinging to the illusion that we could fix things, that we could go back to how it was before. But there was no going back, was there? I tried calling her again. This time, I didn't leave a voicemail. There was no point. She wasn't going to pick up, not when I needed her to. I couldn't even remember the last time she had really looked at me. When was the last time she saw me as someone worth fighting for? I laid back on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the emptiness surrounding me. My phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. I almost didn't look at it, but something told me this time it might be different. I picked it up, my heart racing as I saw her name flash on the screen. But when I opened the message, I froze. It wasn't what I had expected. "We need to talk." My stomach dropped. She had sent me the exact same message I had sent her earlier. She was reaching out now, but it felt too late. The damage had already been done, and now I was the one who felt completely disconnected. I should have been relieved, but all I felt was a sick, sinking feeling. I quickly typed a reply, my fingers trembling as I did. "Where are you?" It wasn't a question I should have asked. It was the kind of thing that implied I still cared, but at that point, I wasn't sure I did anymore. Seconds later, my phone buzzed again. This time, the reply came almost instantly. "At a friend's house. We'll talk tomorrow." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. Just that. I put my phone down and sat in the darkness, my mind swirling. The conversation, the dinner, the words she had said, everything was hanging in the air like a cloud that I couldn't escape. She was at a friend's house. A friend's house. I didn't know whether to be furious or relieved. I couldn't decide. "Tomorrow," she said. Tomorrow we would talk. But part of me knew that the talk would only be the final nail in the coffin. There was no fixing this. No getting back to normal. What I had been afraid of for so long was finally here. The end. The morning came like any other, but it felt different. The air felt thick, like something heavy was hanging over me, waiting for its moment. I barely slept the night before, my mind swirling with every possibility. She was at a friend's house, still not answering my calls. And now, I was supposed to wait for her to come back and have some sort of talk. But I didn't know if I was ready. I wasn't sure I could even look her in the eye after everything that had happened. I spent the morning pacing around the house. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. Every corner I turned, every room I walked into, felt like a reminder of the person I used to be. The person she used to love. I try not to think about it too much, but I couldn't stop myself. Every single thing I did seemed to bring me back to her words. "You're not exciting anymore." It was like a whisper in my ear, a constant buzz, making me question everything. Had she been unhappy for months? Years? Was I just too blind to see it? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming back. By the time afternoon rolled around, I could barely sit still. It was almost like I was waiting for her to come back and tell me everything was fine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was no going back. Even if she wanted to try, something had already broken. Something irreversible. And I wasn't sure I was the same person who walked into that restaurant with her a few nights ago. She came home around 4 p.m. The door opened, and I didn't need to look up to know she had arrived. The quiet footsteps, the sound of her bag hitting the floor. I couldn't bring myself to face her yet. I was still too angry, still too shaken by everything she had said. But she didn't give me the chance to ignore her. She walked straight into the living room. "Noah," she said softly, her voice almost distant. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. It was the same flat tone from the night before, like everything we had shared didn't matter anymore. "We need to talk." I nodded, though I didn't know what there was left to say. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her reasoning. I wasn't sure I wanted to sit through her explanation of how I had become boring, predictable, or whatever else she had to say. But I had to. For both of us. "Sit down, please," she said, gesturing to the couch. It wasn't a command, but it felt like one. I sat down, the space between us feeling miles apart. She took a deep breath, like she was preparing herself for something, but she didn't speak right away. I didn't either. The silence was unbearable, but neither of us knew where to start. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry for how I acted last night," she said, her eyes not meeting mine. "I shouldn't have said what I did, but it's the truth. I've been feeling this way for a long time. I just didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to respond. Should I apologize for being the way I was? For not noticing the signs? For not being exciting enough? I've been thinking about this a lot," she continued, her voice wavering slightly. "And I think you're a great person, Noah. You really are. But I'm just not in love with you anymore. At least, not the way I should be." The words landed like a slap. I felt my stomach twist, but I didn't show it. I couldn't. "So that's it. You've made up your mind?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. She nodded. "I think I've known for a while, but I was scared to admit it. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to hurt us. But I can't keep pretending like everything is fine. You deserve someone who excites you, who makes you feel alive." I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't. I had spent so much of my life trying to make her happy, trying to be what she needed, and here she was, telling me I wasn't enough. She wasn't angry. She wasn't blaming me. It was just the truth as she saw it. "And what about us?" I asked, my voice cracking despite myself. "What about everything we've built?" "I don't know, Noah. I wish I did. But right now, I think we need space. I need space. I think you do too." Her words were soft, almost apologetic, but there was no doubt in her voice. She had already made up her mind. I couldn't hold back anymore. The hurt, the confusion, the disappointment, it all came flooding to the surface. "So what now? Do we just pretend like we don't exist to each other anymore?" She looked at me with those tired eyes, and for a moment, I saw something else there. Something almost sad, almost regretful. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. "I don't know, Noah. I don't know what the next step is. But I can't keep living this way." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't know if there was anything left to say. Finally, I stood up. "I think I need to go for a walk," I said quietly, not waiting for a response. As I grabbed my jacket, I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't look back. I wasn't sure if I would ever look back. I left her standing there, in that empty house, with nothing but the silence between us. The walk didn't help. I thought maybe I'd clear my head. Maybe I'd find some space to figure out what I was feeling. But all I found was more confusion. My mind kept drifting back to that conversation, to her face as she told me she wasn't in love with me anymore. The words kept echoing, over and over, until I couldn't escape them. How had we gotten here? How had things deteriorated so completely without me even realizing it? I found myself in a small park a few blocks away from our house. It was one of those places that used to make me feel at peace, but today, it only felt empty. The trees were bare, the grass patchy, and the air had a cold bite to it. Just like everything between us now. I sat on a bench and stared into the distance, my thoughts spiraling. The night she had told me I wasn't exciting anymore kept replaying in my mind. I could feel the sting every time it crossed my mind. I had tried, damn it. I had tried to make things work, tried to be the husband she wanted, but it was never enough. My phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. I pulled it out, expecting another message from her, but it wasn't Mara. It was a friend from work. Someone I hadn't spoken to in months. The message was simple. "Hey man, how's everything going?" I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. What was I supposed to say? That my marriage was falling apart? That I had just been told I wasn't exciting enough for my wife? No, I couldn't do that. I couldn't let anyone know how broken I felt right now. Instead, I typed back, "I'm good, just trying to get through the week. How about you?" I hit send, but as soon as the message left my phone, I felt this strange sense of emptiness. I realized I had no one to talk to about what was really happening. No one who would understand. And I didn't want to burden anyone with my problems. I was alone in this, and it felt heavier with each passing moment. I looked back at the phone in my hand, debating whether or not to call Mara. I wanted to desperately. I wanted to hear her voice again, even though I knew it would hurt. But the silence between us was too thick. She had made her choice, and deep down, I knew there was no going back. As I stood up and started walking back home, the cold air stung my face, but it didn't make me feel any more alive. It just reminded me that everything had changed. I wasn't the man I used to be, and I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The walk back home felt like the longest one of my life. The city streets were quiet, almost too quiet, and every step seemed to weigh heavier than the last. I had never felt so disconnected, not just from Mara, but from everything around me. The familiar surroundings of our neighborhood, the quiet hum of the city, it all felt foreign. It wasn't just the walk, it was the reality of everything that was happening. I had to face it head on. Mara had said it clearly, without hesitation. She wasn't in love with me anymore. I was no longer the person she wanted. And even though the words were still fresh, like a wound that hadn't had time to heal, I knew deep down that it was true. I reached the front door, my hand hovering for a moment before I turned the knob. It felt strange walking back into the house after everything that had been said. I half expected her to be sitting there, waiting for me, but the place was eerily quiet. She wasn't home. I walked into the living room, the space we used to share, and sat down on the couch. The weight of it all was suffocating. How did we get here? I thought about the good times we had, the moments when we couldn't imagine being apart, the laughter, the late-night conversations, the trips we had taken together. Somewhere along the way, all of that had disappeared. The spark had faded, and I hadn't seen it until now. I wanted to believe it was a phase, a rough patch that would pass. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. She had already checked out, and I was just holding on. Holding on to what? To a version of us that no longer existed? I spent the next hour trying to think of what to do, but nothing seemed right. My mind kept drifting back to her words. You're not exciting anymore. It stung every time, not because I didn't understand where she was coming from. I did, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed. I had been so focused on the mundane, on making things work, that I had forgotten to make them exciting. Forgotten to be the man she fell in love with. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Mara. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at it. I didn't know whether to open it or leave it unread. But I couldn't resist. I tapped the message. Can we talk? I'm coming home soon. The message was brief, but it was enough. She wanted to talk. The question was, what was left to talk about? I had already heard everything. I already knew how she felt. But part of me, the part that still loved her, despite everything, wanted to hear her out. Maybe, just maybe, she had changed her mind. Maybe she had realized that the spark was still there, just buried underneath the weight of life's challenges. I stood up and began pacing again, unsure of what I was feeling. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of fighting for something that seemed like it was slipping through my fingers no matter how hard I tried. And then, just as I thought I had my answer, I heard the door open. Mara was home. She stepped into the living room, her eyes avoiding mine, her expression unreadable. The space between us felt even more palpable now. She wasn't rushing to apologize. She wasn't crying, begging for my forgiveness. No, she just stood there, like she was waiting for me to say something. I stood up from the couch, feeling an overwhelming sense of finality wash over me. I wasn't sure where this conversation would go, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, waiting for something to change. Mara, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I've been thinking, and I've realized something. I can't keep fighting for something that isn't there anymore. I can't be the one to hold this together if you've already let go. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read, but she didn't interrupt. She just listened, her silence louder than any words she could have said. I know we've both changed. I know we've both drifted. I continued, feeling the weight of every word. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep trying to be someone I'm not for you. I'm not the man you need anymore, and maybe I haven't been for a long time. I'm not exciting, not in the way you want me to be. But I've tried. I've tried to make this work, to make you happy. And I guess I'm just done pretending that we're okay when we're not. Mara's eyes dropped to the floor as she processed what I said. I could see her shoulders tense, but she didn't say anything. She didn't argue or try to explain. She just stood there, a quiet acceptance settling between us. I think it's time we accept that we're not who we used to be, I added, my voice breaking slightly. And maybe it's time we let go. It felt like the hardest thing I had ever said, but I knew it was true. The realization hit me all at once. Our marriage was over, and nothing I said or did would bring it back. Mara didn't speak for a long time. She just nodded slowly, like she knew this was coming but had been too afraid to say it aloud. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Noah. I never wanted to hurt you. I just couldn't keep pretending." And in that moment, the words didn't matter anymore. We were both standing at the end of something, and there was no going back. The room felt colder than it should have. Mara stood there, her face drawn with guilt and uncertainty, while I felt every inch of the space between us growing wider. It was almost suffocating. I had said everything I needed to say, but the words had already hung in the air, lingering in a way that made everything feel too final. "I didn't want this to happen," Mara said quietly, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "I didn't want to be this person, but I just couldn't ignore how I felt anymore." She wasn't looking at me, her gaze fixed on the floor as though she was trying to avoid my eyes. I was stunned. Part of me wanted to grab her, demand more answers, scream at her for leaving me without a fight. But I couldn't. I couldn't force her to want something she no longer felt. I didn't know how much time passed before one of us spoke again. It felt like hours, but it could have been mere minutes. I was struggling to process what had just happened. Mara had given up on us. She had given up on me. "I think it's time we face the truth," I said, finally breaking the silence. My voice was steadier than I expected, but the weight behind it felt crushing. "We've both been pretending. I can't keep living in this lie, and neither can you. I've tried to fix this, but I can't fix something that's already broken." Mara's eyes finally met mine, and for a split second, I saw something in them. Regret, sorrow, maybe even pain. But it was too late. "You're right," she whispered, barely audible. "I don't know when it happened, but I've been pulling away for so long. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could fix it, but I couldn't." It was the truth, and it hurt more than I could ever admit. The woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with had already moved on without me, and I had been too blind to see it. "I'm sorry, Noah," Mara added, her voice breaking just slightly. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I don't love you the way I should anymore." The words cut deeper than I thought they would. I had already known, deep down, that this was coming. But hearing it from her mouth, so quietly and decisively, felt like a dagger to the heart. There was no anger left in me, no frustration, just a deep, aching emptiness. I had wanted answers, wanted to understand what went wrong, but the truth was that I already knew. Our love had faded, and no amount of pretending could bring it back. I think we should go our separate ways," I said, my voice firm this time. It wasn't a question, it was a conclusion. The weight of it was heavy, but it was the only choice left. She nodded, a quiet acceptance in her eyes. "I agree. I think we both need space." As the words hung between us, I felt something shift. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just numb. It was over. There was nothing left to fight for, and nothing more to say. Mara didn't move. She just stood there, a shadow of the woman I once knew, her eyes full of unspoken regrets. She didn't reach out to me, and I didn't reach out to her. It was over. And somehow, it felt like the end of something bigger than just a marriage. The days after Mara left were an unbearable blur of silence and broken routines. I wandered through the house like a ghost, surrounded by the remnants of a life I used to know. Photos on the walls, her favorite books on the shelf, the chair she always sat in. The space that had once felt like home now felt hollow. I couldn't escape the memories of her, nor the way she had casually walked out of our marriage. At first, I thought I would crumble. I thought I would fall apart. But after a few weeks, something inside me shifted. I realized I wasn't just mourning the loss of my marriage. I was mourning the man I had become, a man who had put his own happiness on hold to keep someone else satisfied. I had been a fool. But now, I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to let this define me. It was time to take back control of my life. I started hitting the gym again, something I had stopped doing a year ago when life with Mara became too predictable. I reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from. I took up new hobbies, things I had always wanted to try but never had the courage to pursue. And little by little, I began to remember who I was before I became consumed by a relationship that no longer served me. One night, I received a message from Mara. "I've been thinking a lot. Can we talk?" My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't feel the gut-wrenching anxiety I would have before. I felt calm. I was no longer the man who needed answers or validation from her. I was in control now. I replied, "I think we've both said everything we needed to say." And then I hit send. It was the first time in ages I didn't feel compelled to fix everything, to force a closure that had already come. That, in itself, felt liberating. Mara wanted to reopen old wounds, but I wasn't interested in going backward. Not anymore. Weeks later, I ran into her at a coffee shop. She looked the same, but somehow different. There was a sadness in her eyes that wasn't there before. She looked older, like the weight of her decisions had finally caught up with her. "Hi," she said, her voice tentative. "I didn't expect to see you here." I looked at her, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel a rush of pain or anger. I felt nothing but indifference. I had moved on. I had grown. "Hi, Mara," I said, giving her a small nod. "It's been a while." She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I just wanted to apologize, Noah, for everything. I know I hurt you, and I didn't handle things the right way. I was selfish, and I regret it." Her words were hollow to me now. I didn't need her apology anymore. I had already forgiven myself. "You don't have to apologize," I replied calmly. "I don't need your forgiveness. I've learned a lot from what happened. I'm doing better now, and that's all that matters." She looked at me, visibly taken aback. "I don't know if I can say the same about myself," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't feel the satisfaction of revenge. I didn't feel any triumph. I just felt peace. As I turned to leave, I felt a sense of finality. Mara had made her choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. I wasn't the same person I was when we first met. I wasn't the same person I was when she left. And I knew that this was the last time I would see her, the last time I would let her hold any power over me. I walked out of that coffee shop, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine to live. And for the first time in ages, I was ready to embrace it. Fully, unapologetically, and without regret. Please like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all.